So this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling The Left's Pacifist Tradition, Game Theory, Neville Chamberlain, and Putin's War in Ukraine. So this is kind of a leading title here for this episode. It's partly a amplification of reflection upon a Twitter thread by Camille Galeev, Gleev. I will put a link in the description of this video to his Twitter thread, who is a fellow at the Wilson Center I believe it's in Washington, D.C. And he is someone who is not very knowledgeable about Russian history and also the current politics of Russia. And I highly recommend reading his thread. I'm not 100% sure I support all of his assertions, but they are internally consistent. And I would recommend, again, reading them in its original form. But anyway, I am contextualizing his view of Putin and of Russia and of the current situation in Ukraine within the context of my own commitment to the left tradition of anti-imperialism, also to some degree pacifism. I'm not a pacifist myself, but I often find in certain conflict situations in the world that a peacemaking approach is a good option. It's a good way to, or to certainly be ready to engage in negotiations. And disarmament, bilateral disarmament, is a way to encourage peace in the world. And but anyway, as the title may suggest, we're at a situation where peacemaking may not be the solution that will build long-term peace, okay, and build long-term stability and democracy in the world, and also allow us to face the many, many challenges that we are facing in both, domestically here in the United States, but also internationally in Europe, in terms of fighting climate change, our dependence on oil, including obviously Russian oil. So what Galeev brings up is that, and he uses game theory to amplify or to justify his approach, and it makes a lot of sense within his framework, that basically that Putin is a ruthless dictator and autocrat, and has imperial ambitions, very similar to those that Adolf Hitler had in the 1930s and 40s. And so an approach to dealing with someone with those ambitions that is too conciliatory or conciliatory at all encourages him to be more hawkish, okay, to be more aggressive, to be more destructive, to be more expansionist. And his expansionism comes from, and Galeev goes into great detail, from Putin's view of Russian history and his own role in it, his view of Ukraine. I mean, Putin had already described his view of Ukraine as being almost a non-entity relative to Russian nationality, that essentially that Ukraine really shouldn't exist as a nation, or again, I'm paraphrasing his long speech before before the invasion started. But anyway, and so we're looking at facing this ruthless invader, and who's invading a democracy, okay, that is a smaller country than Russia. It's not the smallest country around Russia. It's actually one of the larger countries, but it's still not. It is still a fraction of the size of Russia, and also with a military that's apparently about a fifth the size of Russia's. So and without nuclear weapons. Okay, and anyway. So what we have then is a situation that, so in game theory is the theory of interaction between two parties that don't have perfect knowledge of what the other party is thinking and doing, and it's based on the prisoner's dilemma, which is the idea that you have two convicts or two prisoners of war who are being interrogated separately, and they can either choose to, rat out the other party, the other prisoner, or they can keep silent, and so forth and so on. And so, and there's a whole series of calculations about what is the optimal strategy for solving this particular, albeit artificial game. It's a intellectual construct, but still it simulates some real life situations where you have two parties, two nations or two blocks in this case, who are facing each other, and they don't know what the other is really going to do, or they could know it, in which case, now what Galeev says is that being somewhat unpredictable is better, and this has also been in terms of game theory. If you are totally predictable, then you give the other side a great deal of power to do what they want based on knowing what you're going to do. So this is where always being ready to conciliate or to compromise or to be pacifistic, what I'm calling pacifistic in this particular video, means that you are giving away the game to the other player, or in this case Putin. Okay, that you're telling him, he can do he can escalate as much as he wants, and that if he's so inclined, then he seems to be inclined to do that. And Galeev, builds his case by a fair amount of documentary evidence, as much as you can in a Twitter thread, but certainly I was exposed to some new documentary or images and ideas about how basically there is a cult in Russia of the Second World War and of the Russian victory over Nazism in the Second World War, and it's become kind of a ritual, even though Putin is not a communist, and he's really a right winger. He's really a great Russian nationalist. He has more in common in a way with Tsarist Russia than he does with communist Russia in certain ways, but he has tried to, over the last 20 years of his reign, has tried to rescue this this great war ideology, and there are parades, and there are children are involved in sort of certain kind of pageantry regarding using the regalia, using some version of the regalia of Soviet troops during the Second World War, and this cult kind of impels Putin, or participating in it. It's part of his central ideology. It impels him to sustain that cult. It impels him to be this kind of victor, this great victor over any supposed threat. In this case, he has created the threat of quote unquote Nazis I mean, there are some real Nazis in Ukraine. They're a marginal group, but they are still there, and I am not in favor of them, and there are some troubling elements to which they have, but they don't constitute anywhere near the entirety of the Ukrainian polity or Ukrainian government and so forth and so on. So, and they're a distraction, or they're actually partly the rationale for Putin's invasion, because he's saying he's denazifying. So this is a replay for him of the Second World War, and so he is but fabricated version of the Second World War, because Ukraine is not invading Russia, and they have they don't have the will or the interest in occupying Russia as the Nazis did in the Second World War. So anyway, so the game theory. So with this background, you see that Putin is highly motivated to escalate, and then also and he is escalating, and he has an ideology that is which many people don't understand, because they think of him as some kind of communist or some kind of and they don't really have enough background on what the actual and also actually Galeev in other threads of his has gone into detail about the relationship of the military and the state security apparatus, and I find his account it's internally consistent, it seems trustworthy, and it certainly illuminates certain actions that Putin has taken over the years, and also the actions he seems to be taking now, or yes, he is taking now. So anyway, so we have the situation where a conciliatory approach, or a approach that favors disarmament first, or favors negotiation first, okay, without a military pushback, without arming Ukraine. And I'm not enthusiastic about arming any country and making them and just adding to the burden of arms in our world. But we're facing now a situation where we have a clash of systems, let's say, and now I'm not a super advocate of the Western system, but I favor it to the system of Russia, the great Russian nationalist autocracy that Putin is managing, the neo-fascist propaganda-based free speech suppressing system that that Putin is managing, and so forth and so on, and or not he rules, and he's partly created. He's one of the authors of it, and the main author of it, and then and the leader of it, and he's also the beneficiary of it. And anyway, so we're faced now with a situation where now Galeev, I think, is a little bit cavalier in terms of saying, we can't, disarm or whatever it is. Or basically, he seems to be ignoring the threat of nuclear war, which is something that was not the case in the 30s, in the late 30s, when Neville Chamberlain. That's why Neville Chamberlain is in the title, and Galeev has some tweets about Chamberlain. Where Neville Chamberlain was conciliatory toward the Nazis, and he didn't want to provoke a war at that point in time, and so he allowed Hitler to go into Sudetenland, which part of the Czech Republic now, and so based on very similar claims of national rights and so forth and so on, and minorities that were or Germans abroad that were being persecuted. And so anyway, this situation. Meanwhile, as you know, in history, Neville Chamberlain is noted to be this sort of this laughable figure, the figure you don't want to be as a political leader, and so because he was conciliatory toward the Nazis, and he gave the Nazis time, okay, to build their armaments system and their plans to really conquer Europe and also other parts of the world, really, and to create a German empire, a large, megalomaniacally large German empire along the lines of Hitler's fantasies about that, and so. And also to pursue his policies, his racist, fascist policies of exterminating my people, the Jews, and also other groups that were considered to be that were considered to be impurities in the German folk. Okay, so anyway, Putin's ideology is not exactly identical, but it has too many similarities to Hitler's not to study them and not to take them seriously. So anyway, the idea is that there's great risk associated with this now, greater risk than there was in the 1930s of being more confrontational and more militarily of supporting, bringing in more international support for Ukraine militarily, and at the risk of nuclear escalation, okay, which is, awful and unthinkable. So we're put into a bind in a way, and so there's not one single solution to this, and a thoughtful and good leadership, in this case, Biden and the Western European powers and so forth and so on, and the State Department, the U.S. State Department, and other groups. There's no clear single option here. It's not either one or the other, but there are. And this idea of a no-fly zone is not necessarily only. I'm not sure if that's the right forward military strategy for this confrontation that I'm talking about, and this pushback that needs to happen. In some sense, an unpredictability. So some of this has to do with the Western powers, and allied with Ukraine, have to be not predictable. In other words, not to have a principle of always conciliating with Putin, that they need to have a strategy that's more unpredictable, and that includes more pushback and more, and not to only telegraph conciliation because that's something that, according to Galeev, and he has mounted a fairly convincing case, that is simply feeds the aggressive tendencies of, and this is something I'm saying it's Galeev's idea. It's not only his. I have felt as though, even though I consider myself an anti-imperialist and an anti-militarist, again, sorry, here, please mock me, okay? This seems to be a situation where a well-designed, accurate military intervention, or set of military interventions, needs to happen that create again, unpredictable problems for Putin, and then make him draw back from his aggressive imperialist plans. So anyway, so I'm not. This is not an area of specialty for me. I have an interest in this general area on and off for the last 30, 40 years, but I'm not. I'm not totally a specialist in it, but I do feel like I as someone who is the son of a refugee from Nazi Germany, I do feel obligated to point out the continuities with that, and also to prevent a similar events to the 1930s from happening today. So I think that, and I see people in the ecosphere, or the information ecosphere that I inhabit on Twitter and so forth and so on, reading YouTube and other sources, that I see some set ideas that need to be rethought about, and not necessarily thrown out. Okay, I'm not saying, I think the overall, in the long run, the United States and Russia need to disarm. The world needs to disarm and face its challenges with as few, weapons of destruction as possible. Okay, but in this current situation, it doesn't seem to, the path to that, unfortunately, leads to again, and I can't. There's no guarantees that we can get to that goal of bilateral disarmament and multilateral disarmament throughout the world, but right now we're faced with a situation where there's not a direct line to that goal, in my opinion. But please, in the comments, please share your thoughts, and if you can, provide a little backing for them. I mean, because everybody has their preferred, self-image, and they want to think of themselves as a peacemaker or as a tough guy or whatever it is. And anyway, but please provide, if you can, some substantiation for your views, and also please like the video if you thought it was provocative or interesting, and also please subscribe to Politics 2100 if you're getting something out of our videos here, my videos here. So anyway, see you in the next video.